Time now for weather with Nebraska Extension Ag Climatologist and Market Journal Chief Meteorologist Al Dutcher. Al, I guess it was too good to last. The colder weather came through in a big way this week. How are things looking for the week ahead?
Well, Troy, we certainly did have the cold weather. In fact, we've seen more like winter-type temperatures that we would expect to see at this time of the year. When it all said and done with, we were slightly below normal to slightly above normal, depending on which day you looked at. And really the only precipitation event that we had during this week was that snow that moved through central and portions of southwest and south central Nebraska on Tuesday. And we had some light accumulations with that. Outside of that, the snow hung tough. It didn't seem to want to break toward the warm side until we got to the midweek period. So a little bit slower than what models were showing last week. And then of course we've seen a decent couple days, and now that here we are at the weekend and we're seeing a little bit of a cool down, but there's a couple more warm days in here before we come crashing down right before Christmas. So let's take a look at the upper models, and what I will draw your attention to is we have a subtle wave that's moving through the state today that will bring a slightly cooler air mass to our region. We'll be primarily in the 40s in the statewide. And there's another system upstream that will move in through tomorrow. So low pressure down in Texas. Really there's no moisture source for any of this trough to work on. So it's really going to be more of a dry frontal boundary passage. Most of the precipitation will form to the south of us. And then we get a much deeper surge of cool air as we go into tomorrow. Really focuses that cold air to the east of us. So it's just going to be a temporary little blip in the overall scheme of things. Will be widespread 30s across the state. Not expecting much in the way of any precipitation. It's all going to be confined to the Pacific Northwest and the northern Rockies. Then as we go into Monday, we start to see that trough push to the east. Ridge starts building into the backside of it, and we're going to warm up dramatically. In fact, the warmest temperature will be across western Nebraska. We should make it up into the upper 40s, probably lower to mid 40s across the east. Most of the precipitation runs up the eastern seaboard. Now as we get into the day on Tuesday, there is signs of a trough trying to develop in the western United States, pulling the cold air down behind it. For our area, it does look like most of this frontal boundary passage with the cooler air that is trying to work into the northern plains is going to stay to the south and the west of us. So most of the precipitation stays over the northern Rockies. And then as we get into Wednesday, that cold air, the trough tries to drive all the way down southward, start to bring in cool air into our region. It's going to be a dramatic change in terms of temperatures. We're going to be confined basically to normal to slightly below normal 20s and 30s. Most of the snow stays to our north. And as we get into the day on Thursday, that cold air is straight coming down from Canada, so it's going to be a rather raw day the day before Christmas. Primarily very windy, not much in the way of any precipitation. But we're going to be confined into the 30s and maybe even the 20s. All the snow field remains to the east as another big storm takes shape across the eastern seaboard. And then on Christmas Day, we start to see the ridge returning into our region. Much warmer conditions as high pressure builds in, and a nice actual Christmas Day. Probably should be somewhere into the low 40s to the upper 40s. And then we start to see that trend continue as we go into the weekend. Looking at the 8 to 14 day forecast, it takes us from essentially right before Christmas Eve all the way through the Tuesday after Christmas. Warm conditions as that ridge builds in, and then there are signs that this will break down rapidly toward the last 3 or 4 days of the month. So with that ridge building in, we don't expect much in the way of precipitation. So Troy, overall, can't really argue about a bad forecast here. It looks like a nice day on Christmas. We're just going to have to go through a roller coaster in temperatures before we get to a nice day on Christmas Day.